And away we go on the Wednesday edition of our Orange and Brown Talk podcast. We're going to go through some Andrew Berry draft classes here this week. We've talked about the rookie class this year and what we kind of expect them to contribute. So I thought it would be a good idea as we sort of have this down week to go back and look at some of the previous draft classes, what we've seen and what we should expect from each of these players going into the 2022 season. And then I think at the end of the week, we're going to sit down and we're going to just draft all of Andrew Berry's draft picks. So a draft of multiple drafts. This podcast just keeps, it's like one of those beer cup snakes. It just keeps kind of circling around and eating itself with drafts. All right, here we go. The 2020 draft started with Jedrick Wills.
Well, Jedrick Wills is coming off, not a great season. He did not grade out well, according to Pro Football Focus. He was down, I think, somewhere in the 70s for this year, and that's or I can't remember exactly. I have it here in my story, but that's unacceptable for your starting left tackle. Now, the big problem with Jed Wills in 2021 was the fact that he suffered a serious ankle injury in week 1 and he never really recovered. They had to have him in there because Chris Hubbard also got injured in that game. So they didn't have their swing tackle and they really needed to rely on Jed Wills. So instead of having 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to recover, which is what he really needed, he kept going out there and trying to play on this injured ankle. And then he ultimately did succumb for a few games. But for the most part, it lingered on and it hampered him throughout the season. So I'm very willing to give Jed Wills the benefit of the doubt, attribute much of last season to the ankle injury and believe that he's going to get better. And we heard from both Wyatt Teller and Joe Thomas throughout the offseason that he needs to step it up in the work ethic department, that he needs to throw more work at the job to get to the point where he wants to be.
Okay, so let's move to the second player picked in that draft. And this one is really interesting and probably a little easier to discuss than an offensive lineman. We can put some actual real numbers and stats there. But Grant Delpit obviously ruptured the Achilles his training camp rookie year, got on the field last year, had flashes, for the most part was behind Ronnie Harrison for most of the year. But we did see that playing time increase as the year went along. Where do you stand right now with Grant Delpit?
I think this class has probably 5 guys who are going to start this year, and he's definitely one of them. So we're basically looking at last year, what was essentially his rookie year. And I think with Grant Delpit, though, you're really looking at like the last 5 games that he played, and you're thinking that's something really good for him to build off. That was really when he started to get a lot of consistent playing time, and he just performed really well. He did well rushing the passer. When he was near the line of scrimmage, he did okay in coverage. He did great against the Ravens in the first game they played. He had a 91 grade from PFF in that game. But against the run, he had his solid moments. But I think you're holding him up to all the issues you had that seemed to be targeted at Ronnie Harrison earlier in the year. You didn't get those at the end of the year with Grant Delpit, at least not to people outside where it was so obvious. Now, in the film room, they may say, "Hey, Grant, you really messed up there," but we don't know that. But yeah, I think you go into year 2 thinking, all right, they made a good choice with him. He seemed to kind of hit his stride near the end of the year, which again, if you're thinking of this as a rookie year, then that's great. He seemed to really kind of know what he was doing when he was getting a lot more playing time, and you want those two obviously to merge. So I would assume that he's your week 1 starter next to John Johnson.
Okay, let's talk about these next 2 collectively, because I think it works that way. Jordan Elliott and Jacob Phillips. Which one of those 2, I guess, do you pencil in as it's probably Jordan Elliott, but is there a chance where Jacob Phillips is a starting linebacker this year? Or is Jordan Elliott the only guy of these 2 that you kind of pencil in right now as a top of the depth chart at his position? Or maybe not a top, but a guy who could start at that position.
You know what? I actually think that that Jacob might have a better chance of landing a starting job. It's really kind of hard to say because Jordan Elliott did not have a good 2021 season, but it almost seems like Jacob, a fellow third round pick who was picked after Jordan was at 88 and Jacob was at 97 in the third round. It almost seems to me like Jacob, who had the torn biceps tendon last year, underwent surgery, came back at the end of the year, might have more upside potential than Jordan.
All right, this brings us to tight end Harrison Bryant. Scott, it feels like this number 2 tight end job is just like they're handing the number 1 tight end job to David Njoku. They're giving Harrison Bryant, they're basically gift wrapping this and saying, if you want this number 2 job, take it. It's there.
I mean, he could end up starting 17 games, but that isn't going to tell the real story of his season. He might only get maybe 20% of the snaps if this offense really changes, and gets away from even, 2 tight ends on the field as much as they have over the past few years. So, I think the reason I think they get rid of Andy Janovich, maybe because they like what Harrison Bryant, his versatility, being able to move around and be in the backfield as much. I remember Njoku being in the backfield maybe once last season. It was so rare. But Bryant moved all over the place. So I think that's probably his role going forward. And other than him and Njoku, there's just a lot of who knows there. And
all right, Nick Harris. I guess here's how I'll ask this question. If Nick Harris is not the starting center, is that okay? Like if it's Ethan Posick or somebody else, Dawson Deaton, Mary Kay, is it? I mean, we just kind of just talked about this with the 3rd round picks, but Nick Harris is a 5th rounder. Maybe the plan at some point was for him to take over, but if it doesn't happen, as long as somebody fills that role, was this a bad pick or is it just fine? Is it just something that didn't work out?
Just fine. It's absolutely just fine. Once you get to the 5th round, it's a bonus if the player contributes in a significant way, and it's a real bonanza if he becomes a starter for you. So if Nick Harris becomes the starting center for the Cleveland Browns, that will have been a tremendous pick for Andrew Berry and his personnel department.
So the last one, and this might be the most interesting one, Donovan PeoplesJones, because like we talked about with Harrison Bryant, he's kind of getting handed that number 2 tight end job. But more importantly, Donovan PeoplesJones right now, this is kind of your show as the number 2 guy. So Mary Kay, what is a reasonable expectation here for Donovan PeoplesJones in 2022?
Well, I think some of it will depend on how David Bell comes along. We've heard, from the personnel guys and from the coaches that David Bell can play inside and out. Now, his initial role, I believe, will be as the slot receiver in 3 receiver sets, or however they line it up. When you have a need for the slot guy, that's basically what his primary or first responsibility will be. But if he shows that he can play outside and he's the best receiver on the field after Amari Cooper, then chances are there will be times when it's Amari and David and then whatever else you decide to throw out there. But this is a tremendous opportunity for Donovan PeoplesJones to step up into the number 2 receiver role because he complements Amari Cooper well. Amari Cooper gives you the good downfield threat, the speedy guy, the route runner, the good hands, can do anything. Donovan PeoplesJones is sort of your sort of big, strong, go up and win the contested ball guy, not necessarily your, blazing speed guy. And then in those types of situations, if you had those 2 guys on the outside and David Bell as your slot receiver, that's not too bad, depending on how David Bell comes up the learning curve.